I'd be glad to provide the complete flowing English translation of the script, without chapter titles, and with altered character names, original character names, and altered English names. Isabella Reyes, Dallas, Itaro, Eleanor Ross Ethan, Carrillo, Itaro, Victor Sterling, Don Alejandro Vargas, Itaro, Mr. Alan Carter, Francisco Mendoza, Itaro, Robert Miller Valentina, Ortiz, Itaro, Vanessa Hayes Lucia, Itaro Dom Sophia. Speak in French, and I'll give you my company. And everyone laughed. Amidst the powerful mockery, Eleanor listened with tearful eyes and tired hands. She had lost everything: her career, her dream, her dignity. The rain beat against the window panes as her heart pounded against the injustice. In the silence that followed, her voice rose clear as spring water, revealing a talent that no one could steal from her. 5 languages, a life lesson, a world that opens up when dignity remains intact. If this story of silent resilience touched your heart, give us that thumbs up. It's like reaching out to those who, like Elena, are waiting to be seen, and tell us, how do you think this journey will end? Your life experience makes your opinion a treasure for all of us. The Gran Valencia Hotel stood majestically among Madrid's historic buildings, with its neoclassical facade and windows reflecting the setting sun. For many, it was simply another luxury palace in the heart of the Spanish capital. For Elena Ross, it was the place where life had decided to test her patience and her pride. That September afternoon, as she adjusted the heavy red velvet curtains in the main ballroom, Eleanor discreetly observed the wealthy guests coming and going. The crystal chandeliers multiplied the golden light streaming through the windows, creating an almost magical effect on the polished marble floor. The murmur of conversations in different languages blended with the notes of the piano played by the hotel musician in a corner. At 29, Elena wore the grey, cleaning staff uniform with unusual dignity. Her black hair, pulled back in a simple bun, framed fine features that rarely betrayed her thoughts. Her hands, which now held a feather duster, had held grammar books and dictionaries not long ago. More champagne for everyone, the voice echoed above the general murmur, drawing all eyes to the central table. Victor Sterling, owner of Sterlitech, one of Europe's most prosperous tech companies, was celebrating the acquisition of a rival startup. Surrounded by entrepreneurs, journalists, and what appeared to be runway models, Victor dominated the space with his presence. Tall, with perfectly styled hair and a Swiss watch that cost more than most hotel employees' annual salaries, he exuded the confidence that only money and power could grant. Elena continued her work, trying to go unnoticed as she wiped the gilded frames of the mirrors. The pandemic had hit the education sector particularly hard. Her language academy in Barcelona had closed, and with the accumulated debts and her sick mother in Mexico, she had taken the first available job. Sometimes, as she uttered, "Yes, sir," or "As you wish, madam," she recalled her Japanese phonetics classes or her debates on French literature. "Unbelievable," Victor exclaimed, raising his glass. "We're in the best hotel in Madrid, and the staff can barely conjugate a verb correctly." Laughter erupted around his table, calculated laughter, the kind that seeks the powerful's approval. Elena felt her cheeks burn, but she maintained her composure. It wasn't the first time she had heard such comments. "Do you know what the receptionist told me this morning?" Victor continued, enjoying the attention. "That we has rooms available. We has. Education in this country is in decline." More laughter. Eleanor gripped the duster so tightly her knuckles turned white. She had learned to tolerate many things since starting work at the hotel, but arrogance disguised as intellectual superiority was something she still found hard to stomach. "It's fascinating," Victor went on, turning to look directly at Elena, as if he had just noticed her presence. "People who work in a 5-star hotel and don't even master their own language." Their eyes met for an instant. Eleanor, who had learned to make her silence a shield, simply bowed her head and continued her task. But Victor, energized by the laughter of his audience and the champagne, was not ready to let her slip away so easily. "And you, miss, do you think you could say a sentence in French without getting tangled up?" he said, mockingly imitating a foreign accent. The entire ballroom seemed to hold its breath. Even the pianist stopped playing, as if sensing that something important was about to happen. Elena placed the duster on a nearby table, and for the first time in months, felt something awaken within her. "I could try, sir." she replied, in a quiet, almost inaudible voice. Try. Victor burst out laughing. Well, let's make this interesting. I'll bet my company that you can't say one coherent sentence in French. The murmurs intensified. Some guests seemed uncomfortable, others merely curious. Victor Sterling was known for his eccentricities, but this seemed to go beyond a simple whim. Elena stepped forward, unperturbed by the stares. Her expression was the same, but a sparkle had appeared in her eyes that wasn't there before. When she spoke, her voice filled the room with crystal clarity. Monsieur, je parle français, italien, espagnol, anglais et japonais. Le problème n'est pas ma langue, c'est votre éducation. The silence that followed was absolute. Victor blinked, visibly disconcerted. Some of the attendees who understood French exchanged surprised glances. That could be a memorized phrase, Victor stammered, trying to regain control. Anyone can learn a phrase to impress. Mi potrebbe anche testare in italiano se preferisce, Elena replied in impeccable Italian. O talvez prefiera el japonés. Watashi wa goka kokugo o hanashimasu. Victor's face shifted from bewilderment to disbelief. He tried to formulate some witty response, but the words seemed to have escaped him. Finally, Elena spoke in perfect Spanish, with the confidence of someone who masters not only a language, but the power of words. Knowledge does not need to be exhibited, Mr. Sterling. It speaks for itself. And with that phrase, she picked up her duster and prepared to continue her work, as if nothing had happened. But something had changed in the ballroom's atmosphere. The gazes that now followed Elena were different, and among the guests, an elderly man with a distinguished appearance watched the scene with particular interest. Mr. Alan Carter had witnessed enough scenes of power in his 65 years of life to recognize a moment of genuine dignity when he saw one. As the director of communications for the French embassy in Madrid, he was accustomed to moving among diplomats and politicians, deciphering hidden intentions behind polite words. But what he had just witnessed had genuinely impressed him. While Victor Sterling tried to regain his composure and his guests struggled to resume their interrupted conversations, Mr. Carter rose from his table and walked calmly toward where Elena was continuing to clean, now the molding of a side door. "Excuse me, miss," he said quietly. Elena turned, surprised that someone would address her with such deference. "Yes, sir. Can I help you?" Mr. Carter smiled. His face, etched with wrinkles that spoke of experience rather than age, conveyed a warmth that contrasted with the coolness of the environment. "I am Alan Carter, from the French embassy," he introduced himself, extending his hand. "I must say, your command of languages is exceptional, not only for the fluency but for the phonetic precision." Elena briefly shook his hand, uncomfortable with the attention. "Thank you, Mr. Carter. I studied philology and was a language teacher before." She made a vague gesture toward her uniform. "Before the pandemic. Life has unexpected turns for everyone," Mr. Carter nodded. "But talent always finds its way. If you are ever interested in a job where your skills would be valued, the embassy is always looking for people with your capability." He took a golden card from his jacket and handed it to her. Elena took it with some disbelief, reading the name and contact details. "I promise nothing," the diplomat continued, "but if you stop by tomorrow at IFU 10, we could discuss some possibilities." Before Elena could respond appropriately, the hotel manager's voice resonated behind her. "Ross, what do you think you're doing?" Robert Miller, the services manager of the Gran Valencia Hotel, approached with a quick step and a severe expression. He was a middle-aged man with a thin mustache that seemed to tremble when he was annoyed, as he was now. "Mr. Miller, I was just—" "You are disturbing the guests," the manager interrupted her. "I remind you that your job is to clean, not socialize." Mr. Carter intervened with a calm but firm voice. "In fact, I was the one who approached the young lady, and far from being disturbed, I am greatly impressed by the cultural level of your staff. It is a credit to your establishment." The manager paled, suddenly recognizing who he was facing. "Mr. Carter, my deepest apologies. I didn't realize that." "No problem," the diplomat interrupted him kindly. "But perhaps you should reconsider the value of your employees. Sometimes the greatest treasure of a hotel is not in its polished surfaces, but in the people who polish those surfaces." With a slight nod to Elena, Mr. Carter returned to his table, leaving behind a confused manager and an even more confused cleaning employee. Across the ballroom, Victor Sterling watched the scene with a mixture of irritation and curiosity. His phone vibrated with a message. One of his assistants had sent him information about the Duster Girl, as he had called her. The message included a link to an academic profile at the University of Barcelona. Victor opened the link, and as he read, his expression shifted from surprise to a kind of reluctant respect. Elena Ross, graduated with honors in philology, specialized in comparative linguistics, had been a visiting professor at universities in Japan and France, author of several articles on Mediterranean dialects, and winner of an international scholarship that the pandemic had interrupted. Her academic, photograph smiling and confident, contrasted dramatically with the silent woman in the grey uniform, who now discreetly slipped toward the service exit. Victor put away his phone, pensive. For the first time in a long time, he felt he had judged someone too quickly. And what was more unsettling for him, he felt he had to do something about it. That night, as Elena put the golden card into the inner pocket of her worn coat, the rain began to fall over Madrid. She waited for the bus under a faded awning, thinking about Mr. Carter's words. Was it possible that life was offering her a second chance? The small apartment she shared with two other waitresses on the outskirts of Madrid greeted her with its familiar austerity. She sat on her narrow bed and took out the card again, running her fingers over the golden relief of the French crest. Then she picked up her old phone and dialed an international number. "Mom?" "Yes, everything is fine. I think tomorrow might be a good day." Across the city, in a penthouse overlooking Retiro Park, Victor Sterling contemplated the lights of Madrid through his window. The champagne had lost its effect, leaving only a bitter taste in his mouth. On his mahogany desk rested a folder with the acquisition contract for the startup he had celebrated that afternoon. Millions of euros on paper that now seemed strangely insignificant. He picked up his phone and called his legal assistant. "Vanessa, I need you to prepare something for tomorrow." "Yes, I know what time it is. It's important." The rain intensified, beating hard against the windows of both dwellings, separated by kilometers of distance and worlds of difference. But for the first time, an invisible thread of destiny connected these two disparate lives. The sunrise in Madrid always has something poetic about it, even on cloudy days. For Elena, who woke up before her alarm went off, the pearly grey sky filtering through her small window seemed to hold a promise. She dressed with special care, choosing the only formal outfit she kept from her time as a professor: a sober black skirt, a white blouse, and a navy blue blazer slightly worn at the cuffs. It wasn't the ideal attire for an interview at the French embassy, but it was the best she had. Her roommate, Sophia, a waitress from the Canary Islands with an easy laugh, watched her curiously as Elena applied a touch of makeup in front of the shared bathroom's cracked mirror. "Do you have a date?" she asked, leaning against the doorframe. "Something like that," Elena replied with a nervous smile. "A job interview." Sophia gave a small jump of joy and hugged her from behind. "I knew it. I always said you were too elegant to be carrying a duster around." "Where? Another hotel?" Elena hesitated for a moment before answering. "At the French embassy." Sophia's eyes widened. "The embassy? Seriously? That's incredible," she exclaimed, then frowned. "Wait, how did you get an interview there?" Elena briefly told her what had happened the previous afternoon, omitting some details about Victor Sterling. She didn't want it to sound as if she had humiliated an important hotel guest. "Oh my God." Sophia put her hands on her head. "It's like one of those movies where the protagonist goes from Cinderella to princess. Only in your case, from cleaning floors to... What exactly will you do at the embassy?" "I don't know yet," Elena replied, applying a discreet lip gloss. "I'm not even sure they'll offer me anything concrete. Maybe they just want to talk." Sophia waved her hand dismissively. "A man doesn't give you his golden card just to chat, honey, especially a diplomat. You're going to get that job. I can feel it." Meanwhile, across town, Victor Sterling swam in the heated pool of his penthouse, completing his morning routine of 50 laps. The water, unlike the sky, was perfectly clear, like his thoughts. He had slept little, mentally reviewing the hotel scene over and over. It wasn't so much the embarrassment of having been publicly corrected that bothered him, but the feeling of having been unfair. And injustice was something Victor ironically detested, even though he sometimes practiced it without realizing it. Stepping out of the pool, his personal assistant, Vanessa Hayes, waited next to the lounge chair with a towel and a tablet. "Good morning, Mr. Sterling. I have prepared the documents you requested last night." Victor dried his face and took the tablet, reviewing the details of the contract on the screen. "Is everything in order?" he asked, running his finger across the screen to see the different clauses. "Legally, yes," Vanessa replied professionally. "But I must say I find it a rather unusual decision." Victor looked up with a wry smile. "Unusual? You'd say I was crazy if I told you the whole story." "It's not my place to judge your decisions, sir." "But you do anyway," he retorted, with no trace of anger. "And you're probably right. But there's something about that woman. It's not just that she speaks 5 languages flawlessly, it's her dignity. Do you know what she told me? Knowledge does not need to be exhibited. It speaks for itself." He paused, reflective. "No one has taught me a lesson like that in years." Vanessa, who had been working for Victor longer than any other employee, nodded slightly. She knew her boss well. Beneath his arrogant and sometimes unbearable exterior, there was an intelligent man who valued genuine merit. He just sometimes forgot it, especially when surrounded by flatterers. "Would you like me to send these documents now, or would you prefer to review them more carefully?" Victor digitally signed the contract and handed it back to her. "Send them, and prepare the car. I have a meeting at Barajas at 11, but before that I want to stop by Castillo Jewelers." "The jewelers?" Vanessa asked, surprised. "Yes," Victor replied, heading toward his dressing room. "I need a watch." At 9:45, Elena stood in front of the imposing French embassy building on Paseo de la Castellana. Her heart pounded as she climbed the stone steps. She had mentally rehearsed what she would say, how she would introduce herself, but she still felt a knot in her stomach. The security guard stopped her at the entrance, requesting her identification and the reason for her visit. "I have an appointment with Mr. Alan Carter," she explained, showing the golden card. The guard nodded, checked something on his computer, and told her to wait, while he called someone on the phone. After a brief exchange, he returned her identification with a kinder smile. "Go ahead, Ms. Ross. Mr. Carter is waiting for you on the 2nd floor, office 218. One of our assistants will accompany you." A young man in a dark suit guided her through elegant corridors, decorated with impressionist paintings and marble busts. The contrast with the hallways of the Gran Valencia Hotel, which Elena had cleaned so many times, could not have been greater. When she finally reached office 218, Mr. Carter greeted her with the same warmth as the day before, but now in a setting that seemed tailor-made for him, a spacious room with bookshelves full of books, an antique oak desk, and windows overlooking a small interior garden. "Miss Ross, I'm glad you came," he said, gesturing for her to sit in one of the armchairs in front of his desk. "Coffee, perhaps?" "Yes, thank you," Elena replied, trying not to show her nervousness. Mr. Carter signaled his assistant, who discreetly left to fulfill the request. "Well, let's get straight to the point," the diplomat began, settling into his chair. "After our meeting yesterday, I was curious enough to do a little research on you. I hope you don't find it intrusive." Eleanor shook her head, although the idea that he had delved into her past slightly unsettled her. "Your resume is impressive," Mr. Carter continued. "Your work on the phonetic evolution of Mediterranean dialects is particularly interesting. I read it this morning." The surprise must have shown on Elena's face, because Mr. Carter smiled with satisfaction. "Yes, I still read academic articles. Keeps the mind sharp. What I wonder is how someone with your background ended up cleaning rooms at the Gran Valencia." There was no reproach in his voice, only genuine curiosity. Elena took a deep breath before answering. "The pandemic, I suppose. Like many others, I lost my job when the academy where I taught closed. Then my mother fell ill in Mexico, and the medical expenses." She made a vague gesture. "One does what one has to do." Mr. Carter nodded understandingly. "Life rarely follows the paths we plan," he said, just as the assistant returned with 2 cups of coffee. "But sometimes, detours lead us to destinations better than the ones we had imagined." He took a sip of his coffee and placed a folder that Elena hadn't noticed before on the table. "I have a proposal for you, Ms. Ross. The embassy needs a linguistic advisor who can assist at international conferences, review official documents, and occasionally serve as an interpreter at high-level meetings. Your command of 5 languages makes you an ideal candidate." Elena felt her heart quicken. It was exactly the kind of job she had dreamed of during her years of study. "The salary is not extraordinary," Mr. Carter continued, opening the folder to show her a sheet with figures, "but it is considerably better than a hotel employee's. It includes international health insurance and the possibility of occasionally traveling to Paris and other European capitals." Elena looked at the figures and had to make an effort to maintain her composure. It was more than triple her current salary. "It seems very generous," she managed to say. "It's fair for someone with your qualifications," Mr. Carter replied simply. "Would you be interested?" "Of course I would," Elena answered without hesitation. "But when would I start?" "Ideally, next week." Would that be a problem? Elena thought. About the hotel, the notice she would have to give, her few belongings she would have to pack. "I would need at least 2 weeks to sort out some matters." 2 weeks seems reasonable, Mr. Carter nodded. "And now, if you don't mind, I'd like to ask you a few more specific questions about your experience." For the next hour, the conversation flowed naturally, shifting from Spanish to French, then to English, and occasionally to Italian, as if Mr. Carter wanted to personally verify Elena's linguistic abilities. To her surprise, Elena found that she was genuinely enjoying the interview, feeling that finally someone valued what she could contribute. When they finally said goodbye, with a verbal agreement and the promise of a formal contract in the coming days, Elena stepped out onto the street feeling like she was walking on clouds. The sky was still grey, but to her, Madrid had never shone so brightly. The office of the Gran Valencia hotel manager smelled of artificial pine air, freshener and stale coffee. Robert Miller listened to Elena's resignation with an expression that wavered between disbelief and annoyance. "The French embassy," he repeated, as if the words were difficult to process. "And you say you're starting in 2 weeks?" "Yes, Mr. Miller," Elena confirmed, maintaining a professional tone. "As stipulated in my contract, I must give 15 days' notice, which I will fully comply with." The manager leaned back in his chair, causing the worn leather to creak under his weight. His eyes, small and shrewd, studied Elena as if seeing her for the first time. "You never mentioned you spoke. How many languages did you say?" 5, sir. Spanish, English, French, Italian, and Japanese." 5 languages, Miller muttered, shaking his head. "And you've been cleaning bathrooms for 8 months? There was something in his tone, a mix of amazement and reproach, that made Elena tense up. "I did the job I was assigned, sir, and I did it to the best of my ability." Miller sighed and pulled a form from his desk drawer. "Fine, fill this out. Human Resources will pay you the days you are owed upon completion." He paused, as if hesitating. "It's a shame to lose someone with your abilities. If we had known—" "It's on my resume, sir," Elena replied calmly, "the one I submitted when I applied for the position." The manager had the decency to look slightly embarrassed. Both knew that no one had bothered to read closely the resume of an aspiring cleaner. "In any case," Miller continued, regaining his composure, "I wish you luck in your new position, and I hope there are no hard feelings about, the incident the other day." Elena knew exactly what he was referring to, the moment he had reprimanded her in front of Mr. Carter. "No hard feelings," she replied with a polite smile. "In fact, you could say that moment helped me secure this opportunity." When she left the office, Elena found several of her colleagues waiting in the hallway. The news of her resignation had spread like wildfire. "Is it true you're going to work at the embassy?" asked Maria, an older woman who had been at the hotel for decades. "Is it because of what happened with that rich guy the other day?" added Sophia, the youngest in the group. Elena found herself surrounded by curious faces and enthusiastic questions. She briefly explained the situation, trying to downplay the drama. She didn't want it to sound like she was boasting or belittling the work. "They would all continue to do." "I always knew you were different," Maria said, giving her a tight hug. "We're going to miss you, but I'm happy for you." "You have to promise us you'll come visit," Sophia insisted, "and that you won't forget us when you're an important diplomat." "I am not and won't be a diplomat," Elena laughed. "I'll just be translating documents and helping in meetings." "You're already important to us," Maria stated, her eyes shining. "You've given us hope." Those words stayed with Elena as she completed her shift, cleaning rooms with the same meticulousness as always, although now every gesture seemed to have a different meaning, as if she were silently bidding farewell to a stage of her life. During her break, she checked her phone and found a message from an unknown number. Opening it, she felt the floor shift beneath her feet. "Ms. Ross, this is Victor Sterling. I need to speak with you about an important matter. Could you grant me a few minutes after your shift ends? I will be at Café Giralda, across from the hotel. It's regarding our conversation the other day." Eleanor read the message 3 times, unsure how to respond. What could Victor Sterling want? To apologize? Or perhaps to complain about having been exposed? After thinking about it, she replied with a brief formal message. "Mr. Sterling, my shift ends at 18 Kwangs. I can meet you at 18:30 at the cafe you mentioned." The reply came almost immediately. "Perfect. Thank you for your time." The rest of the afternoon passed with exasperating slowness. Eleanor found herself constantly checking the clock, torn between curiosity and apprehension. When her shift finally ended, she changed out of her uniform into her normal clothes, jeans, a simple blouse and a light jacket, and headed toward Café Giralda with a determined step, though her stomach was a knot of nerves. The cafe was one of those traditional Madrid establishments that had survived modernization. Marble tables, dark wood chairs, and a polished brass counter where expert baristas prepared coffees with almost scientific precision. At that hour, the place was half empty, which allowed Elena to immediately spot Victor Sterling, sitting at a table in the back. He had removed his tie, and the top buttons of his shirt were unbuttoned, giving him a slightly more relaxed look than the impeccable businessman she had seen at the hotel. When he saw her approach, he stood up with a formality Elena didn't expect. "Ms. Ross, thank you for coming," he said, indicating the chair opposite him. "Mr. Sterling," Eleanor replied, sitting up straight, as if preparing for an interview. "What did you want to talk about?" Victor signaled the waiter before answering. "Can I get you something? Coffee, perhaps, or something stronger?" "Coffee is fine, thank you." The waiter approached and took their orders, a black coffee for Elena and a cortado for Victor. When he left, an uncomfortable silence settled between them. Finally, Victor broke it. "I suppose you're wondering why I wanted to see you." "I am indeed," Elena admitted. Victor took an envelope from his jacket and placed it on the table. "First, I wanted to apologize for my behavior the other day. It was inappropriate and, frankly, shameful." Elena hadn't expected such a direct apology and wasn't sure how to respond. Victor continued, "And second, I wanted to fulfill my bet." "Your bet?" Elena frowned, confused. "I said I'd bet my company if you could speak French correctly." He pushed the envelope toward her. "And you did. Perfectly, in fact." The waiter returned with the coffees, briefly interrupting the conversation. When he left, Elena looked at the envelope warily. "Mr. Sterling, you can't be serious." "I'm always serious when it comes to business," he replied with a half smile. "Please open the envelope." With slightly trembling fingers, Elena opened the envelope and took out a legal document. As she read it, her eyes widened. It was a contract transferring 5% of Sterlitech shares to her name, Victor's company. "This is—" Eleanor searched for words. "This is absurd. I can't accept this." "Why not?" Victor asked with genuine curiosity. "I made a public bet. I must honor it, because it was clearly a joke. No one bets their company over something like that." "I did." Victor took a sip of his coffee. "Look, I'm not giving you the whole company, obviously. That would be irresponsible to my employees and shareholders. But 5% is substantial, enough for you to have significant income, without having to worry about working in—" He stopped as if realizing he was about to say something inappropriate. "In cleaning," Elena finished with a slightly challenging tone. Victor had the decency to look uncomfortable. "I didn't mean to offend." "You don't offend me. It's what I currently do, at least for 2 more weeks." 2 weeks? Eleanor briefly explained her new employment situation at the embassy. As she spoke, she noticed Victor's expression change, showing something akin to respect. "That's impressive," he said when she finished. "But my offer still stands. In fact, now it makes more sense. You wouldn't have to quit your new position to manage the shares. You would simply be a passive owner." Elena looked at the document again, thinking about what accepting it would mean. It wasn't just money, it was a validation, a kind of poetic justice. But she also felt there was something wrong with the situation. "Why are you really doing this, Mr. Sterling? Is it guilt? Remorse?" Victor seemed to reflect before answering. "Maybe a little, but mainly because you impressed me. Not just your command of languages, but your dignity. You reminded me of something I used to believe but perhaps forgot at some point along the way. And what is that? That a person's true worth has nothing to do with their bank account or their professional title. He paused. My father was a plumber. He worked all his life fixing pipes and drains. He never went to college, but he read a book every week and knew Cervantes and Shakespeare better than many professors. He taught me that respect is earned, not bought. Elena didn't expect that confession. She looked at Victor with new eyes, trying to reconcile the arrogant businessman from the hotel with the man who now spoke of his plumber father with evident admiration. That's a valuable lesson, she finally said, but I still can't accept this. At least think about it, Victor insisted. The contract is there. All you have to do is sign it and return a copy to me. My contact information is in the envelope. He stood up, leaving a bill that generously covered both coffees. And this is for you too. He placed a small blue velvet box on the table. Before Elena could protest, he added, It's not what you think. Open it when you're alone. Consider it a reminder, not a gift. And with that, Victor Sterling said goodbye with a formal gesture and left the cafe, leaving Elena with €1 million contract, a mysterious box, and more questions than answers. That night, in the solitude of her room, Elena opened the velvet box. Inside, she found an elegant but discreet Swiss watch. It wasn't ostentatious like the one Victor usually wore, but sober and classic. Beside the watch was a handwritten note. Time is the only true luxury. It makes us all equal. Use it or keep it as you prefer, but remember that every minute counts. The next 2 weeks passed like a fever dream for Elena. During the day, she meticulously fulfilled her last duties at the Gran Valencia Hotel, cleaning rooms and hallways with the same dedication as always. At night, she reread old academic texts, updated her technical vocabulary, and prepared her mind for the challenge ahead. The contract Victor Sterling had offered her remained on her bedside table, unsigned. Next to it, the box with the Swiss watch that she occasionally looked at, as if it were an object from another world. She hadn't worn it once, although sometimes she held it between her fingers, feeling its weight and the soft ticking that seemed to whisper something about the passage of time. Her last day at the hotel was marked by a small impromptu celebration in the staff canteen. Maria had baked a cake, and Sophia had collected money from everyone to buy her a small brooch shaped like a fountain pen. So you remember us when you write those important documents, Sophia said, her eyes shining. Elena hugged each of her colleagues, promising not to forget them. When she said goodbye to Manager Miller, he handed her a surprisingly complimentary letter of recommendation. Just in case you ever need it, he said, with a tone that suggested it was he who hoped not to be forgotten. The next day, Eleanor walked through the doors of the French embassy, no longer as a visitor, but as an employee. Her small desk in the communications office overlooked an interior garden where a stone fountain murmured softly. On the table, a new computer and a plaque with her name, Elena Ross. Linguistic advisor, Mr. Carter introduced her to the team with warm and precise words. No one asked about her recent past as a cleaner. To them, she was simply a talented philologist joining their department. The first weeks were one of intense learning. Elena familiarized herself with diplomatic protocols, specific formats for official documents, and the particular rhythm of work at the embassy. She soon found herself reviewing press releases, translating confidential letters, and assisting at meetings where her ability to move fluently between languages proved invaluable. One afternoon, while correcting the translation of a speech for a cultural event, Mr. Carter stopped by her desk. "How's the adjustment going?" he asked in his usual affable tone. "Very well, thank you," Elena replied, genuinely satisfied. "I feel in my element." The diplomat nodded, pleased. "Next week we'll have an important reception. The French Minister of Culture will be present, along with several Spanish businessmen. I would like you to attend as an interpreter." Elena felt a mix of enthusiasm and nervousness. "It will be an honor." "Excellent. And Elena," Mr. Carter added before leaving, "sometimes life puts us exactly where we're supposed to be, even if it takes unexpected paths to do so." With an enigmatic smile, the diplomat walked away, leaving her with the feeling that, indeed, she had finally arrived where she belonged. The reception at the French embassy shone with a sober elegance so different from the ostentatious glitter of the Gran Valencia Hotel. Eleanor, dressed in a navy blue pantsuit she had bought with her first paycheck, moved among the guests with natural grace, translating conversations and facilitating cultural exchanges. Her hair, now styled in an elegant bun, and her upright posture gave her a presence that several guests noticed. No one would have guessed that barely a month ago, this woman was polishing the same kinds of glasses she now held delicately. The French Minister of Culture, a jovial 70-year-old man with a perfectly trimmed white beard, was particularly impressed with the fluidity with which Elena translated his complex literary references. "Madame, votre français est exquis," he commented, bowing slightly toward her. "Where did you study, if I may ask?" "At the University of Barcelona, Minister, and then a year at La Sorbonne, thanks to a scholarship," Elena replied in equally impeccable French. "Ah, La Sorbonne, alma mater of so many. Great thinkers. Mr. Carter has found a true treasure in you." The evening was unfolding smoothly when Elena felt her heart stop for an instant. Among the group of Spanish businessmen who had just entered the room, she immediately recognized Victor Sterling. He wore a dark grey suit that contrasted with his usual more flashy style. His expression seemed more thoughtful, less arrogant than the last time she had seen him. Next to him, Vanessa, his assistant, was talking to him discreetly. For the next half-hour, Elena managed to stay on the opposite side of the room, focusing on her duties. But in a reception of that size, it was inevitable that they would eventually cross paths. It happened near the drinks table. Elena was pouring a glass of water when she felt a presence beside her. "Ms. Ross," Victor said in a respectful tone. "What a pleasant surprise." "Mr. Sterling," she replied, maintaining her composure. "I work here now, as a linguistic advisor." "I know," he nodded. "Mr. Carter mentioned it when he invited me. My company is funding a cultural exchange program." An uncomfortable silence ensued, finally broken by Victor. "You never returned the contract, signed or not?" Elena felt her cheeks flush slightly. "I haven't signed it." "May I ask why?" Elena pondered her answer, aware that several eyes were drawn to them, curious about the conversation between the new interpreter and the well-known businessman. "Because I prefer to earn my own way," she finally said. "I appreciate the gesture, but I can't accept something like that just because I proved I speak several languages." Victor looked at her with new admiration. "And the watch?" "I keep it," she replied. "As a reminder." "Of what?" "That a person's true worth has nothing to do with their bank account or their professional title," Elena quoted, repeating the words he himself had spoken in the café. For the first time, Victor Sterling smiled with absolute sincerity, without a trace of arrogance or irony. "Touché, Ms. Ross, touché." 3 months after joining the embassy, Elena's life had completely transformed. Her small shared apartment was now a distant memory. She had rented a modest but cozy studio in the Malasaña neighborhood, decorated with books and small souvenirs from her previous academic trips. Her work, far from being limited to simple translations, had evolved. Mr. Carter had quickly recognized not only her linguistic mastery, but also her intellectual sharpness, assigning her increasingly greater responsibilities. One spring morning, while reviewing official correspondence, she received an email that momentarily took her breath away. It was an invitation to participate as a speaker at an international congress on intercultural communication in Tokyo. "It's an exceptional opportunity," Mr. Carter explained to her when Elena went to his office. "The embassy will cover all expenses. Your multilingual experience and your unique perspective will be very valuable." "My unique perspective?" she asked, intrigued. "Exactly," the diplomat nodded. "You have lived on both sides of privilege, Elena. You know the academic world and the working world. You have experienced how the same knowledge can be valued or ignored, depending on the context. That gives you insight that few possess." Elena reflected on his words. It was true. Her experience at the hotel, however difficult it had been, had taught her valuable lessons about dignity and social perception that no doctorate could have provided. "I'll need to prepare a paper," she murmured, more to herself than to her boss. "You have a month," Mr. Carter replied, "and if you need help, my door is always open." The following weeks, Elena dedicated every free minute to researching and structuring her presentation. She titled her paper, "The Invisible Language, Communication, Power and Dignity in Multicultural Environments." In it, without specifically mentioning her personal experience, she analyzed how linguistic and social prejudices influenced international communication. One afternoon, while working on her presentation in the embassy library, she received a notification on her phone. It was an article from Spain's most important economic newspaper. Victor Sterling announces scholarship program for migrant workers. The article detailed how the businessman had created a foundation to fund higher education for service workers with undeveloped academic potential. The initiative included full scholarships for high university programs and specialized courses. Talent is everywhere, Sterling declared in the article. Sometimes it just needs an opportunity to shine. Elena closed the browser with an enigmatic smile. She didn't need her name to be mentioned to know that in some way she had inspired that initiative. Perhaps the seed of their brief exchange had germinated into something much larger than themselves. That night, for the first time since receiving it, Elena took the Swiss watch out of its box and put it on. Not as a symbol of status, but as a reminder of the value of time and how words spoken with dignity could transform realities. Tokyo greeted Elena with a clear sky and the sweet scent of cherry blossoms. The International Congress on Intercultural Communication was held in a modern convention center overlooking the Imperial Palace, bringing together specialists from around the world. The Spanish delegation, led by Mr. Carter, held a prominent position. Elena, nervous but determined, mentally reviewed her presentation as she watched the auditorium gradually fill up. "Take a deep breath," Mr. Carter advised her, sensing her tension. "Remember that you are not here to impress anyone, but to share valuable knowledge." When it was her turn, Elena walked onto the stage with a firm step. Facing the microphone, she contemplated the sea of expectant faces. Among them, she surprisingly distinguished a familiar face, Victor Sterling, sitting discreetly in one of the middle rows, her presentation flowed naturally, alternating between Japanese, English, and French according to the sections. She spoke about how language could be both a bridge and a barrier, about the inherent dignity in being heard and understood in any social context. True intercultural dialogue, she concluded, occurs not when we simply translate words, but when we translate respect. The applause was warm and prolonged. During the question session, she answered with eloquence and humility, earning the respect of academics with decades of experience. At the subsequent reception, while talking with a Finnish professor, she felt a presence beside her. It was Victor. "Congratulations on your presentation," he said, with a genuinely admiring tone. "It was brilliant." "Thank you," Elena replied. "I didn't expect to see you here. I'm in Tokyo on business, but when I saw your name on the program..." He paused, searching for the right words. "Let's just say I wanted to see how your story continued." They looked at each other for a moment, no longer the arrogant businessman and the cleaner, but as two people who had been transformed, each in their own way, by a brief encounter. "I've read about your scholarship program," Elena commented. "It's an admirable initiative." "I had a debt to pay," he replied simply. "Not to you, but to what you represent." Before they could continue their conversation, Mr. Carter approached to introduce Elena to the Japanese ambassador. With a gesture of farewell, Victor moved away into the crowd. That night, contemplating the lights of Tokyo stretching out like a sea of terrestrial stars from her hotel room, Elena reflected on the unexpected turns of fate. From cleaning floors in Madrid to giving lectures in Tokyo in barely 4 months. The Swiss watch on her wrist marked the hours of a life that had recovered its direction, not by chance, but by the silent force of dignity. The return to Madrid brought with it new notoriety for Elena. Her paper in Tokyo had been published in academic journals, and the embassy received requests from other international institutions interested in her perspective on intercultural communication. One autumnal afternoon, while organizing her increasingly busy schedule, she received an unexpected call from the Gran Valencia Hotel. "Ms. Ross, this is Robert Miller." The manager's voice sounded strangely humble. "Excuse the interruption, but we have a delicate situation. A very important Japanese delegation is staying with us, and there have been some serious cultural misunderstandings. We were wondering if you could help us." Elena felt a mixture of irony and compassion. The same hotel that had ignored her qualifications now desperately needed her. With Mr. Carter's authorization, Elena returned to the Gran Valencia that same afternoon, this time through the main entrance. The reception staff, who barely recognized her in her elegant blue suit and leather briefcase, led her to the presidential suite where the Japanese delegation waited, visibly annoyed. Over the next 2 hours, Elena not only translated but culturally mediated, explaining subtleties that had been completely misinterpreted by both parties. Her knowledge of Japanese protocol proved invaluable. When the situation was finally resolved, Miller accompanied her to the exit. "Thank you," he said sincerely. "You have saved not only this reservation, but probably my job." Elena nodded, without resentment, but also without condescension. "The world is full of hidden talents, Mr. Miller. Sometimes you just have to look beyond the uniform." As she crossed the lobby, several of her former colleagues greeted her with smiles and discreet gestures of admiration. Maria, cleaning the hall mirrors, winked at her conspiratorially. Elena stepped out onto the Madrid street feeling strangely complete. The circle had somehow closed. Victor Sterling's scholarship program had selected its first 20 beneficiaries, service sector workers whose academic training had been cut short by economic or family circumstances. Elena received an invitation to the inaugural ceremony, to be held in one of the auditoriums of the Complutense University. She hesitated about attending, but curiosity finally outweighed her reluctance. The auditorium was packed with journalists, academics, and figures from the business world. In the front row, as guests of honor, sat the 20 scholarship recipients, waiters, cleaners, concierges, cooks, dressed in their best clothes, their faces reflecting a mix of pride and nervousness. Victor took the stage with a sobriety that contrasted with his former ostentation. His speech, brief and direct, surprised many in attendance. "This program is not charity," he affirmed with conviction. "It is an investment in talent that our society has overlooked. It is also a personal debt I owe to someone who taught me that true education is not measured by degrees, but by the dignity with which knowledge is lived." His eyes briefly met Elena's, who was sitting discreetly in a middle row. He didn't name her, but the message was clear. After the ceremony, during the reception, Victor approached her. "What did you think?" he asked with a vulnerability Elena had never seen in him. "I think you have sown something important," she replied sincerely. "Something that will bear fruit long after we are both gone." Victor nodded, contemplating the scholarship recipients, who were now talking animatedly with university professors, creating the first bridges to their new lives. "I never properly thanked you," he said quietly. "There's nothing to thank me for," Elena replied. "Everyone makes their own way." "Yes, but sometimes we need someone to remind us who we really are." At that moment, a photographer approached, asking them to pose together. Both agreed with some discomfort. "The mentor and the sponsor," the photographer commented, arranging them. Neither corrected the mistake, perhaps because, in some way, they had both been mentors to each other. A year after joining the embassy, Elena received an offer to transfer to Paris. The Spanish embassy in France needed a coordinator of cultural affairs, someone with precisely her profile. Mr. Carter received the news with a mixture of pride and sadness. "I will miss you," he confessed, "but it would be selfish to hold you back. Paris will be just the beginning." The farewell at the embassy was warm. Her colleagues organized a small party with French champagne and Spanish ham, symbolizing the cultural bridge that Elena represented. The news of her transfer also reached Victor, who sent her a short handwritten note. "Paris will always be the city of second chances. May you find everything you are looking for there. V." Next to the note, a small book of French poetry in a bilingual edition. On the first page, a dedication to Elena, who always finds the right words. On the day of her departure, while checking her luggage, Elena contemplated the Swiss watch she now wore habitually, a symbol of a time that had begun in humiliation and flourished in dignity. Her mother, who had finally been able to travel from Mexico thanks to Elena's better salary, accompanied her to the airport. "I always knew you would do something great," she said, hugging her tightly. "But the greatest thing is that you never forgot who you are." Paris greeted Elena with its characteristic blend of beauty and melancholy. The first weeks were a whirlwind of new experiences, learning the metro routes, discovering small boulangeries hidden among cobblestone streets, getting used to the distinctive rhythm of the French capital. Her apartment, a small attic in the 5th arrondissement, overlooked the Seine and the towers of Notre Dame, Still undergoing reconstruction after the devastating fire, Elena's mornings began early. From her window, she watched the city slowly wake up. Tourist boats preparing for their daily tours, bouquinistes opening their small stalls of antique books along the river, Parisians rushing with their baguettes under their arms on their way to work. This view, which many tourists would pay fortunes to enjoy, was now part of her daily life. Her job at the Spanish embassy kept her constantly busy. As the coordinator of cultural affairs, her agenda overflowed with commitments, organizing educational exchanges, overseeing Hispanic art exhibitions, coordinating visits from Spanish intellectuals and artists, and preparing academic conferences that strengthened the ties between the two countries. Her command of languages proved invaluable in a position where linguistic precision was essential for cultural diplomacy. The first few weeks, Elena had felt the weight of responsibility on her shoulders. Would she live up to expectations? Had they bet too high on her? But it soon became clear that her life experience, that unique blend of academia and the real world, gave her a perspective that her colleagues greatly valued. You have something that is not learned in universities. Claude Martineau, the French cultural attaché, had told her after Elena resolved a potentially disastrous misunderstanding between a Catalan artist and a Parisian gallery owner, a sensitivity for the human nuances behind the words. In the evenings, when the hustle of her daily schedule subsided, Elena found time to work on a personal project that had begun to germinate in her mind since that first encounter with Victor at the Gran Valencia Hotel. A book that would explore the relationship between language, power, and dignity, based on both her academic knowledge and her personal experiences. She had provisionally titled it The Language of Dignity. At her small desk, under the warm light of an Art Nouveau lamp she had found at a flea market, Eleanor typed reflections, anecdotes, and analyses. She wrote about how words could build bridges or raise walls, about how accent or vocabulary often determined who was heard and who was ignored, about how linguistic respect was, in essence, an act of recognition of the humanity of the other. Sometimes as she wrote, she found herself thinking of Victor Sterling. What had become of him? Occasional news that arrived through Spanish media spoke of the expansion of his foundation, the success of his scholarship program, but little about the man himself. Elena wondered if that brief interaction between them had been as transformative for him as it had been for her. The Swiss watch, which she now wore daily, silently reminded her of that unexpected connection, that moment when two seemingly irreconcilable worlds had collided, forever changing their orbits. One rainy November afternoon, while returning home after a particularly exhausting meeting with representatives of the French Ministry of Culture, Elena stopped in front of a poster advertising an exhibition of Spanish technology at the Grand Palais. Among the participating companies, Sterlitech stood out, presenting an innovative, simultaneous translation system. Curiosity overcame prudence. The next day, during her lunch hour, Eleanor went to the Grand Palais. The magnificent glass and wrought iron building, an emblem of the Parisian Belle Époque, housed dozens of booths where technology companies from all over Spain exhibited their latest innovations. The Sterlitech stand stood out for its sober elegance, so different from the technological ostentation that characterized other companies. There were no giant screens or blinking lights, but a minimalist aesthetic that invited reflection rather than immediate astonishment. They were presenting a new simultaneous translation system that used artificial intelligence but retained the human touch in the more subtle cultural interpretations. Elena approached with feigned interest. A young presenter was explaining the system's operation to a small group of visitors. The revolutionary thing about our approach is that we don't seek to eliminate the human translator, but to empower them, she explained enthusiastically. The AI identifies cultural nuances where misunderstandings could occur and suggests alternatives, but it always leaves the final decision to human judgment. As she examined the device, running her fingers over the touch screen where a demonstration was displayed, a familiar voice surprised her. It was inspired by an exceptional linguist who taught me that technology can never replace the dignity of human understanding. Victor Sterling was there, barely a meter away. He was dressed with a simplicity that would have been unthinkable in the man Elena had known years ago. Dark pants, a white shirt without a tie, and an unpretentious navy blue blazer. His hair showed a few grey strands at the temples, and the small wrinkles around his eyes suggested he smiled more frequently than before. "Victor," Eleanor said, recovering from the initial surprise. "I didn't expect to see you here." "The surprise is mutual," he replied with a genuine smile, devoid of the arrogance that had once been his hallmark. "Although perhaps I shouldn't be surprised to find the cultural coordinator of the Spanish embassy at an event like this." They looked at each other for a moment, each assessing the changes that time had wrought in the other. For Elena, it was like looking at a refined version of the man she had known, as if someone had polished the rough edges of his personality, revealing a nobility that had always been there, hidden under layers of pretense. "What brings you to Paris?" Eleanor finally asked, looking away from the scrutiny that was becoming too intimate. "Business, primarily," he replied, discreetly pointing toward the stand. "This exhibition is important for us, especially since France will be our main market in Europe for this new system." He paused, as if deciding whether to share something more. "But I also wanted to see how our scholarship program is doing here. We have 5 Spanish students pursuing master's degrees at La Sorbonne. Ex-service sector workers, just as you once were." The mention of her past carried no condescending tone. It was simply a statement of fact, a recognition of where their crossed paths had begun. "I'm glad to hear the program is still growing," Eleanor commented sincerely. "I've read about it in the Spanish press. You're doing something truly valuable." Victor nodded, with an expression that suggested Elena's recognition meant more to him than the multiple business awards he had received for the initiative. "Would you like to grab a coffee?" he asked, pointing toward a small cafe set up in a corner of the Grand Palais. "I'd love to catch up, unless you have to go back to the embassy soon." Eleanor checked her watch, the watch he had given her, and nodded. "I have 40 minutes before my next meeting." The cafe was a quiet space away from the exhibition's bustle. Sitting across from 2 coffees, an espresso for him, a café au lait for her, they briefly talked about their current lives. Victor told her that he had significantly reduced his involvement in the daily management of Sterlitech, delegating responsibilities to a team of young executives he fully trusted. He now dedicated most of his time to the foundation, which had expanded its programs to include not only university scholarships, but also professional training and support for entrepreneurs from humble backgrounds. "I discovered there is more satisfaction in building people than in building companies," he confessed, with a vulnerability that the old Victor would never have shown. "Companies come and go, but when you change the course of a life, that remains." Elena, in turn, told him about her work at the embassy, the challenges and satisfactions of building cultural bridges between 2 nations with such intertwined histories as Spain and France. She also mentioned, almost shyly, her book in progress. "It's an analysis of how language reflects and reinforces power structures, but also how it can be a tool for dignification and understanding," she explained. "I'm combining linguistic theory with personal experiences and field observations." Victor's eyes lit up with genuine interest. "I'd like to read it when it's finished," he said sincerely. "It sounds exactly like the kind of perspective we need in these polarized times." "You'll be one of the first to receive a copy," she promised. When it was time to say goodbye, both stood up with the awkwardness that arises when a conversation could continue for hours, but immediate obligations prevent it. "It's been a pleasure to see you, Elena," Victor said, extending his hand. "I'm happy to see that you've found your way." "Likewise," she replied, briefly shaking his hand. "Your transformation is inspiring." They looked at each other for an instant, aware that there was much more to say, unasked questions, unshared reflections. But neither made a move to propose another meeting, as if both sensed that their paths, though parallel in purpose, should remain separate for the moment. Upon leaving, they did not exchange numbers or addresses. Both knew that their paths would continue to cross, not by chance, but because they shared a transformed vision of the world, a vision born in a moment of confrontation that had become a catalyst for both. That night, while working on a new chapter of her book, Elena reflected on the encounter. There was something poetic about how life had brought them back together in Paris, the city of second chances. Both, so different in their origins and circumstances, had found ways to honor that brief interaction, which, unbeknownst to them at the time, would change the course of their lives forever. The rain beat gently against her window panes, creating a soothing rhythm that accompanied her thoughts. In the distance, the lights of the Eiffel Tower twinkled, reminding her that sometimes the most significant connections were like those flashes, brief but powerful, capable of vastly illuminating the horizon. The following months were a creative whirlwind for Elena. During the day, her work at the embassy continued to expand. At nights and on weekends, she immersed herself in writing her book. The words flowed as if they had been waiting for years to be released, as if every experience lived. From her academic days in Barcelona to her months cleaning rooms at the Gran Valencia, from her confrontation with Victor to her current diplomatic position, had been necessary preparation for this work. The Parisian spring gave way to a warm summer, and then to an autumn of golden leaves floating over the Seine. Elena established a routine that included long walks through the city, seeking inspiration in its historic corners and the diverse faces of its inhabitants. Sometimes she would sit on the steps of Sacré-Cœur, contemplating the city's panorama, while reflecting on the chapters she had just written. It was during one of those contemplative afternoons that she received an email that would change the course of her life again. UNESCO was looking for a specialist in intercultural communication to lead a new program focused on preserving minority languages and promoting understanding between cultures. Someone, Elena suspected Mr. Carter, had submitted her name as a recommendation. After several interviews and the evaluation of a pilot project she had designed, Eleanor was selected for the position. At 31, she would become one of the youngest officials in a position of such responsibility within the international organization. The transition from the embassy to UNESCO coincided with the completion of her manuscript. The language of dignity had grown into a profound and personal analysis of how linguistic structures reflected and perpetuated social hierarchies, but also how language could be a tool for empowerment and mutual recognition. When she sent the manuscript to several publishers, she didn't expect an immediate response. To her surprise, 3 weeks later she received calls of interest from 2 prestigious publishing houses, one Spanish and one French. Both wanted to publish the book, impressed by the combination of academic rigor and personal experience that permeated every page. After careful negotiations, Eleanor reached an agreement with both publishers. Her book would be published simultaneously in Spanish and French, with translations into English, Italian, and Japanese scheduled for the following months. The publication would coincide with an international conference on linguistic diversity that UNESCO would organize in Madrid, a synchronicity that seemed too perfect to be accidental. In the days leading up to her trip to Madrid for the conference and the official book launch, Elena received an unexpected call. "Ms. Ross, this is Vanessa Hayes, Victor Sterling's assistant." Eleanor vaguely remembered the woman from her encounter at the hotel years ago. Efficient, discreet, always one step behind her boss. "Yes, I remember you," Elena replied. "How can I help you?" "Mr. Sterling asked me to send you his congratulations on the upcoming publication of your book," Vanessa explained professionally. "He learned about it through publishing contacts and wanted to express his admiration." "That's very kind of him," Elena replied, surprised that Victor was aware. "He also asked me to inquire if it would be possible to reserve a signed copy. He will be in Madrid for the UNESCO conference, as Sterlitech is one of the event's sponsors." Elena felt a thrill of anticipation at the thought of seeing Victor again. "Of course, it will be a pleasure. They can pick it up during the signing session after the launch." "Excellent," Vanessa replied. "I'll let him know. And, Ms. Ross," she added, in a slightly more personal tone, "if I may say so, Mr. Sterling has changed a lot since he met you. I've never seen him so committed to anything as he is with the foundation. I think you had a significant impact on him." Before Eleanor could respond to this unexpected confidence, Vanessa professionally said goodbye, leaving her to reflect on the transformative power of seemingly fortuitous encounters. On the morning of her flight to Madrid, Elena woke up before dawn. From her window, she watched as the first lights of day drew golden silhouettes over the Parisian rooftops. In just over 2 years, her life had taken turns she never would have imagined. Now she was returning to Madrid, not as the invisible employee who cleaned rooms, but as an authoritative voice who would be heard by academics, diplomats, and cultural leaders. As she packed her suitcase, her fingers brushed against the blue velvet box, where she still kept the note that had accompanied Victor's watch. "Time is the only true luxury. It makes us all equal." Those words, which she had initially interpreted as a reflection on privilege and humility, now also seemed like a promise that true transformations require time, patience, and a willingness to recognize the dignity in the other. The flight to Madrid was smooth. As they flew over the Pyrenees, Elena mentally rehearsed her speech for the book launch. She wanted to strike the perfect balance, to be academically rigorous without being inaccessible, to share personal experiences without becoming the protagonist, to inspire without falling into easy sentimentality. Madrid greeted her with bright sunshine and that characteristic hustle she had missed so much in Paris. UNESCO had housed her in a boutique hotel near the Retiro, not far from where she used to live when she worked at the Gran Valencia. In a nostalgic impulse, she decided to take a stroll through her old neighborhoods before the preparatory meeting for the conference. The streets seemed both familiar and strange, as if they belonged to another life. Passing by a cafe where she used to have breakfast on her days off, she recognized a familiar figure. Sophia, her former roommate, was sitting at an outdoor table talking animatedly with a friend. "Sophia," Elena called out, approaching with a smile. The woman looked up, confused for a moment, and then her face lit up with recognition. "Elena, my God!" she exclaimed, getting up to hug her warmly. "I can't believe it. You look so different," Elena suggested, laughing. "Elegant," Sophia completed. "You look like a proper Parisian." Elena briefly joined them, catching up. Sophia had left the hotel and now worked as a supervisor in a restaurant chain, a position with better pay and more reasonable hours. She spoke proudly of having resumed her tourism studies, interrupted years ago. "You were an inspiration, you know," Sophia confessed as they said goodbye. "When we heard you got that job at the embassy, many of us thought, if she could make it, so can we." Those words stayed with Elena throughout the rest of the day, reminding her that personal transformations rarely remained contained in a single life. They often created ripple effects that touched other existences. The official book launch was to take place in the auditorium of the National Library, 2 days after the inauguration of the UNESCO conference. Meanwhile, Elena divided her time between preparatory meetings, interviews with cultural media, and reunions with former colleagues and friends. Mr. Carter, who had traveled from his retirement in Valencia, especially for the occasion, invited her to dinner the night before the launch. In a small restaurant in the Madrid of the Austrias, the former diplomat, now with completely white hair but the same lively gaze, raised his glass in an intimate toast. "To unexpected paths," he said with a meaningful smile, "and to those who have the courage to walk them." Elena returned the toast, profoundly grateful for the presence of this man who had seen potential in her when others only saw a cleaning employee. "I never properly thanked you for giving me that opportunity," she said, after a moment of reflection. "You changed my life." Mr. Carter gently shook his head. "I only opened a door, Elena. You were the one who had the courage to cross it and the talent to advance beyond it." He paused, savoring his wine. "Besides, I wasn't entirely altruistic. I knew you would be an invaluable asset to the embassy." The morning of the launch dawned with a clear sky and a palpable anticipation. When Elena arrived at the National Library an hour before the event, she was surprised to find that a small line of people was already waiting to enter. The auditorium was completely full. In the front row as guests of honor sat her mother, who had flown from Mexico, Mr. Carter, and some of her former colleagues from the hotel, including Maria and Sophia, who greeted her enthusiastically when she walked onto the stage. Among the diverse audience, academics, students, diplomats, cultural journalists, Elena spotted Victor Sterling sitting discreetly in a middle row, accompanied by Vanessa, who now directed the foundation that bore his name. The launch began with introductory remarks from the Spanish publishing director, followed by a brief speech from the UNESCO representative, who highlighted the relevance of Elena's work in a historical moment where intercultural communication had become more crucial than ever. When it was finally her turn to speak, Elena approached the podium with a firm step but a racing heart. She briefly looked at her notes, but then decided to set them aside. This moment required authenticity, not rehearsed perfection. 3 years ago, she began in a clear and serene voice, I was cleaning rooms in a luxury hotel right here in Madrid. A surprised murmur ran through the audience. I don't say this to inspire pity or admiration, but to establish a fundamental fact. The words I share today in this book were born not only from academic theory, but also from lived experience. As she progressed in her speech, alternating between personal anecdotes and theoretical reflections on language and power, Elena observed how the audience responded with growing interest. She spoke about how accent, vocabulary, or even the tone with which we address others can reflect and reinforce social hierarchies, but also about how conscious language can become a tool for dignification and mutual understanding. True communication, she explained, approaching the end of her presentation, occurs not when we simply exchange information, but when we recognize the inherent dignity in the person we are speaking to, when we listen not just to reply but to comprehend, when we allow the other's words to transform us, even slightly. Her eyes briefly met Victor's, who nodded imperceptibly, as if acknowledging the shared truth in that statement. Words have power, Elena concluded, not just to describe the world but to transform it. But that power is only fully manifested when we speak and listen with respect, when we recognize the inherent dignity in every human being, regardless of the uniform they wear or the accent with which they express themselves. The applause resonated strongly when her speech ended. The question and answer session that followed demonstrated how profoundly her words had impacted the audience. Students, professors, and professionals from various fields shared their own experiences about how language had shaped their perceptions and relationships. During the book signing that followed the formal launch, Elena found herself surrounded by enthusiastic readers. She dedicated time to each person, listening carefully to their comments and responding to their questions with the same attention she would have given a diplomat or renowned academic. Victor patiently waited his turn at the end of the long line of readers. When he finally reached Elena, he handed her his copy, already open to the first page, where she had written a special dedication days before coming to Madrid, to Victor, who learned to listen. With gratitude, Elena. I read it last night, he confessed. It is extraordinary, just like its author. Elena smiled, remembering their first encounter, so different from this moment. Do you know what's the most curious thing? She commented. That without that moment at the hotel, this book probably wouldn't exist. Life has strange ways of leading us where we are meant to be. Victor nodded, sometimes through painful detours. They looked at each other in silence, aware of how much they had both changed, how much they had learned from each other unintentionally. In that instant of stillness between them, the whole essence of what Elena had tried to convey in her book seemed to crystallize. That true understanding arose not from grand statements, but from those silent moments of mutual recognition. I've been thinking, Victor finally said, that perhaps our foundation and your program at UNESCO could collaborate in some way. We share similar goals, after all. I think that's an excellent idea, Elena replied. We should explore it. And so, in the middle of a library that housed the words of past generations, two people who had started as antagonists sealed an alliance based on mutual respect and a shared vision for the future. The days in Madrid passed with the intensity characteristic of significant moments. The UNESCO conference was a resounding success, with Elena participating in several panels where her unique perspective on intercultural communication was received with enthusiasm and recognition. Her book, meanwhile, began to generate important conversations in academic and cultural circles, with the first reviews highlighting her ability to bridge linguistic theory and everyday human experience. In the midst of this professional whirlwind, Elena found a moment for a personal visit she considered necessary. The afternoon was golden in Madrid when she decided to visit the Gran Valencia Hotel one last time before returning to Paris, not as a guest or an employee, but as a silent witness to her own journey. The lobby was still as impeccable, with its crystal chandeliers and polished marble floors. Some faces were familiar among the staff, others were new. The scent of fresh flowers and expensive perfume floated in the air, mixing with the discreet murmur of conversations in various languages. She sat on one of the lobby sofas, observing the flow of guests and workers, each immersed in their own story, visible or invisible to others. From this new perspective, she could appreciate the silent choreography that kept a place like this running. Waiters efficiently gliding between tables, receptionists maintaining professional smiles while solving problems, cleaning staff appearing and disappearing with almost magical discretion. How many times had she herself been part of that invisible ballet, essential but rarely recognized? Miller, the former manager, now the hotel's general director, recognized her as he crossed the lobby and approached to greet her. His thin mustache, once black, now showed silver streaks, but his demeanor was still that of a man aware of his authority. "Ms. Ross, what an honor to have you back here," he said with sincere cordiality. "I've followed your career in the press. A true cultural ambassador, eh? And now a writer, too." "Thank you, Mr. Miller," Elena replied with a genuine smile, without a trace of the old resentment. "It's strange to be back, even if it's just for a visit." "Your book is in our guest library," the director commented, with a pride that suggested some kind of association with Elena's success. "And I must confess that I myself have read it with great interest." "I'm glad to hear that," Elena replied, genuinely pleased that her ideas had reached the person who had once considered her just another employee. "We have implemented some changes since you—" He hesitated, searching for the right word. "Since you worked with us. Now all our employees receive free language classes, and we have a professional development program for those who want to advance in the company." Elena nodded, pleasantly surprised by this information. "That's an excellent initiative. It was inspired by you, although I might never have admitted it before," Miller confessed, with an honesty that evidenced his own evolution. "Your story made us rethink many things about how we value internal talent." As they talked, Elena noticed that several of the cleaning employees were watching her discreetly from a distance, with expressions ranging from curiosity to admiration. Among them, she recognized Rosa, a young Ecuadorian woman who had started shortly before she left. "Excuse me for a moment," she asked Miller, getting up to approach the group. The women seemed momentarily embarrassed to have been caught watching her, but Elena greeted them warmly, asking about their families and briefly sharing her recent experience. She did not mention her achievements or her current position, focusing instead on listening to their stories, their daily challenges, their small victories. "Is it true that you started out cleaning rooms here?" Rosa finally asked, with a mix of disbelief and hope. "There are rumors, but some say it's just a story to motivate us." Elena smiled, recognizing the importance of the question. "It's completely true," she confirmed. "For 8 months I cleaned the exact same rooms you are cleaning now. I wore the same uniform, used the same cart, and yes, I also heard comments from guests who didn't even look me in the eye." The women exchanged astonished glances. "And how?" another one began to ask, but stopped, as if the question were too bold. "How did I get to where I am now?" Elena completed. "With hard work, yes, but also with help from people who saw beyond my uniform, and with the certainty that dignity does not depend on the job we do or the money we earn." Before saying goodbye, Elena took several business cards from her purse and distributed them among the women. "If you ever need guidance on studies or job opportunities, don't hesitate to contact me," she told them. "Sometimes all we need is for someone to open a door for us." When she returned to Miller, Elena noticed that Victor Sterling had just entered the lobby. He was wearing a dark grey suit that, although obviously expensive, lacked the ostentation that had once characterized his image. Seeing Elena, he approached with a discreet smile. "It seems we both had the same idea," he commented, referring to the hotel visit. "A nostalgic trip to the past." Miller, recognizing Victor, bowed almost imperceptibly and politely excused himself, leaving them alone. "Something like that," Elena replied. "I wanted to close a circle before going back to Paris." "I understand completely." Victor looked around as if evaluating the place with new eyes. "It's strange how the same space can hold such different meanings depending on the moment in our lives we inhabit it." They walked together toward the exit, under the curious gaze of some employees who recognized the famous linguist and the well-known businessman. The late afternoon light of Madrid greeted them with its characteristic golden hue, bathing the historic facades of the street with an almost magical glow. "Ready for your train?" Victor asked, checking his watch. "Almost," she replied. "I just wanted to see this place one last time." Where it all began. They stopped by the revolving door, that symbolic threshold between two worlds that both had crossed in opposite directions. She outward, toward a recognition she had always deserved, he inward, toward a humility he had needed to rediscover. "You know," Victor commented, thoughtfully contemplating the hotel's facade, "I never properly thanked you for what you did for me." "I didn't do anything special," Elena replied sincerely. "I just defended myself with dignity." "On the contrary," he insisted, You reminded me of something essential that I had forgotten along the way, that our true worth is not in what we possess or the power we wield, but in how we treat others, especially those we consider different or less important. Eleanor smiled, recognizing the truth in his words. It was precisely that transformation in Victor's perspective, more than any of her own professional achievements, that made her feel that her journey had a deeper purpose. Perhaps that is the most valuable lesson of all, she said, that true communication, true understanding, only happens when we see the other in their complete humanity. A taxi pulled up in front of the hotel, waiting to take her to the station where she would catch the high-speed train to Paris. Before getting in, Elena turned one last time toward Victor. "The Foundation and UNESCO," she said, picking up the conversation they had started at the book launch. "I think we could create something truly significant together, a program that combines your scholarships with our international platform." "I completely agree," Victor replied. "My team will contact yours to start working on it." They looked at each other for an instant, aware that they were simultaneously closing one chapter and beginning another. The irony was not lost on either of them. That initial confrontation, which could have remained a bitter anecdote, had transformed into the catalyst for a profound change for both, and now, potentially, for many others. "The most powerful language," Elena finally said, as the taxi driver loaded her small suitcase, "is not the one spoken with the mouth, but the one expressed with the dignity of our actions." Victor nodded, understanding the depth of that truth that both had learned, each in their own way, through an unexpected journey of mutual recognition. "Until next time, Eleanor," he said, extending his hand. "Until always, Victor," she replied, briefly shaking it. And so, with the simplicity of someone who has found her true place in the world, Elena Ross got into the taxi, carrying with her not only the memory of where she had been, but the certainty of where she was going, toward a future where every word spoken, every gesture made, would be imbued with the silent dignity that had always been her true strength. The taxi drove away through the streets of Madrid, leaving behind the Gran Valencia Hotel and Victor Sterling, who stood motionless for a moment, watching the vehicle disappear into the traffic. Then, with a determined but serene step, the businessman headed toward his next meeting, carrying a signed copy of The Key, Language of Dignity, and the renewed conviction that the deepest transformations always begin with a simple act, recognizing in the other the same humanity we claim for ourselves. On the train to Paris, as Madrid faded into the horizon and the Castilian landscape unfolded its austere beauty, Elena opened her book to the last page, where she had written a final reflection that summarized the journey she had undertaken since that afternoon at the hotel. Words can wound or heal, exclude or include, build walls or bridge gaps. But what determines their power is not their complexity or eloquence, but the dignity with which we speak them and the humility with which we listen to them. Because in the end, the true language we all yearn to speak is one that recognizes in every exchange the invaluable presence of the other. She closed the book and contemplated the sunset that painted the Spanish fields gold, feeling that deep peace that only comes when one has fully honored their own path, with its detours and returns, with its unexpected encounters and its silent lessons. The Swiss watch on her wrist marked 7:30. Time, that true luxury that makes us all equal, continued its inexorable course. But now, for Elena, every minute shone with a new clarity, as if she had finally learned to read not only the words in books, but also the invisible language of life itself.